Hey, what's going on, guys? Another training coming at you, and today we're going to be talking about how to, if a client has a term, how to replace that with an IUL. And if you guys know me and you've seen me sell, for the past 3 years, I have sold a lot of IULs, and I'm a big believer in the product and the benefits of it. How I explain it to the client and how I put them in a better situation from their term is I typically tell them, like, hey guys, so you have a fairly decent policy now. It's currently called a term. Are you guys aware of how that works? Because first of all, you never want to disparage their current coverage because that makes you look small. So I'm like, fairly decent, but really there's two types of coverage. There's term and there's whole life. Has anybody explained the difference between the two? And typically clients like, yeah, well, da-da-da. I'm like, okay, perfect. So don't mean to bore you, John and Mary, but the two types of coverage is term, short for terminate, it's 10, 20, 30 years, whatever the case may be, and it expires. And then the flip side, there's whole life IUL coverage. So with the whole life for an IUL, it's lasts your entire life and it builds cash value. So it's not a question of if it's paying out, it's simply a question of when, and it never expires on you. Are you guys aware of what percentage of term policies pay out of the client passing away within the term? I'm like, oh no, what is it? Well, John and Mary, take a wild guess. And, okay, and they typically guess, 20, 50%, whatever the case may be. I'm like, that's a good guess, John and Mary. But according to the National Insurance Association, and look this up, less than 3% of term policies pay out. So that means the insurance company knows that there's a 97% chance you're going to outlive that term. And when you go to outlive that term, well, you're 10, 20, 30 years older. So insurance is 10, 20, 30 times more expensive. And that's even if you're eligible. In addition to that, you're not getting any money back at the end of your term. You're really just, with a term, you're really rolling the dice, hoping it pays out. Versus on the flip side, with the whole life IUL, like I said, it's not a question of if it pays out, it's simply a question of when. Because that thing's lasting your entire life. But John and Mary, I still sit down with some clients and they tell me, you know what, Jonah, whole life sounds great, but honestly, I really only care about having coverage the next 25, 30 years I have this mortgage, or whatever the case may be. And I really don't care about having coverage anymore. Do you know what I still tell them, John and Mary? I still tell them to take out a whole life policy, IUL coverage. And just to clarify, pretext, with most, because this is pitching an IUL. I don't say this with regular whole life, but if you're pitching an IUL, in most IULs, you got to check the illustration, but the majority of the time, they're fully vested in that cash value 25, 30 years down the road. And they have more cash value than what they paid into it with that recurring interest. So anyway, back to what I'm saying. So John and Mary, you know what I still tell them, John and Mary? I still tell them to take out a whole life policy because I'm like, listen, 25, 30 years from now, if you guys decide you no longer want this policy, once you guys are fully vested in that cash value, not that I recommend this, but it's your policy. You do whatever you want. If you decide you no longer want it, no worries. You simply go to surrender the policy and you're going to get all the money you've paid into it back refunded to you plus interest. Where like we talked about on term, you're not getting anything back at the end. So with whole life, there's really no situation you come out behind because either A, that policy is paying out, or B, if you decide you no longer want it down the road, like I said before, you go to surrender it once you're fully vested and you get all your money back plus interest. And then always follow it up with, does that make sense, John and Mary? And then boom, that's how you replace a term with a more expensive IUL policy for a client.